Today, we're interviewing Gene Curry, Company A, 119th Armored Engineers Battalion, being interviewed by Vernon L. Williams of the Department of History at Abilene Christian University. This interview is being recorded on January the 26th, 1997 at Columbus, Ohio. Well, let's get started, Gene. Can you tell me a little bit about who your parents were and where you grew up? We'd like to know a little bit about that period of time before Pearl Harbor, the 1920s and 30s, growing up, going to school, that kind of thing. Give us a little background.
Well, I was born on May 17th, 1925 in Seattle, Washington. One of 10 children. The father was a railroad worker. The mother was strictly a housekeeper. Went to Georgetown School, which is a suburb of Seattle, and on to Cleveland High School. And, this was during the war. The war started in '41. This is during the war, and I actually left school at the start of the 9th grade because I had 4 brothers already in the service, and I felt, well, you know, you get that patriotic feeling. So I left school and went to work at a few factories around town, and I went to the see, where am I here? Well, at age, when the war first started, they used to have a draft call every 6 months. Well, somewhere along the line, I thought that was still going on. So here.
Well, we're interrupted, so let's pick up on your thoughts on the draft. You thought that 6-month draft call was still going on.
Yeah, so naturally I didn't go down and report to the draft board. And finally I heard a rumor or two that you're supposed to register as soon as you become 18. So I called the draft board and they said, get your body down here, you know. So within 30 days I had a questionnaire, another 30 days I had a physical, and another 30 days I was in the Army at Fort Lewis, Washington. And so we took our induction at Fort Lewis, and then we went down to, was sent to Camp Abbott, Oregon for engineer and infantry basic. And after that, while I was at Camp Abbott, well, I'd had 2 teeth in front, had been destroyed at school when some kid hit my head down at the sink, you know, the drinking fountain. So they decided the 2 teeth should come out, the front teeth. So and they would not replace them because you only need so many teeth before they ship you overseas, because you only need so much to chew with. And I guess they figured if I was killed overseas or something, I wouldn't need the teeth. So anyway, they wouldn't put them back in. Here I go. Now I'm sent back to Mount Rainier Ordnance School, 30 miles from home. Now I'm supposed to I go back home with these 2 big front teeth missing. So to make a long story short, I went into coma at nighttime and after duty, and had a civilian dentist put the teeth in. So after Camp Abbott, I had a 30-day pre-embarkation furlough, and then I was shipped to Camp Beale, California, which is now Beale Air Force Base. And one of my first duties, this is basically what they call a repo depot, a replacement depot. Whenever a division needed men, they would call this repo depot and tell them we need so many engineers or so many infantry, whatever it is. So while I was there, they put me to work guarding German sailors. Well, the first day I report down to duty, they gave me 20 German sailors and told me to take them down to the PX and have them clean it up. Well, I had a carbine with, I think it's about 12 shots in a carbine. And here I'm taking off down the road, a green 19-year-old kid with 20 German sailors and 12 shots, you know. So anyway, I marched them down. And as soon as I got down to the PX, I said, well, they just started to spread all over. I called, this one spoke English. I said, hey, get these people back here, you know. And he said, don't worry, we've been doing this for months. We love it here. They were in Southern California, away from the war, so they were very happy. So they did their thing and then came back. So a few days later, I was up on a tower. They had a tower on each corner of the prison camp. I don't know, there probably was 1,000 sailors there. And the way you get up in your tower, you identify yourself to the guard up on the tower, and he sees who you are, and he opens a little trap door. You climb the stairs, and go through the trap door, and he goes down, and you lock the door again. About the middle of the night, I hear something coming up my stairs. So I got my carbine, ready to blast whoever was down there. It was a raccoon. some outfit couldn't take it overseas with. It was a pet. He just come up to see me. So that was a big deal there. But while I was at Camp Beale, the 12th Armored put in a call for people. So we had a whole trainload go out to Camp Barkley because of the fact there's so many people in the Army. Before you go overseas, they have a bad leg or a bad arm, or something wrong with them. So they remove them from the division and get new people from the repo depot. And that's where I joined the 12th Armored Division.
About when was this?
This was approximately probably August of 1944.
Just before they're going to leave.
Yeah. And the funny part about that, about the first day I'm in, the first few days I'm in the battalion, my company commander called me in the office. He says, "Curry, what's the history of your VD?" I said, "Hey, Sergeant, I never had no VD." He said, "Don't give me that bull. It's on your record here." Well, I said, "Look, I never had it." He said, "Well, I can't take it off your record. You go down and see the battalion medical officer. Maybe he can take it off." I said, "Okay." Went down. He said, "No, I can't take it off. You have to go see the division medical officer. Maybe he can do it." "Oh, okay." I went down and see him. "No, I can't take it off." So he says, "Well, maybe if you see the camp medical officer, Camp Barkley medical officer." So I went to see him. He said, "Well, if you know 2 or 3 guys that's been with you for the last 6 months, well, I can get it taken off." Well, luckily there'd been some people come from Camp Beale with me, so I was able to get that removed. Then, about 2 days later, they call a company formation, and we're standing all there. Here comes a lady with her daughter walking through the ranks. Well, someone in the Camp Barkley is about to make this lady a grandmother. So all this young girl would have to do is point at you and you'd be dead meat. So luckily she kept on going. So after that, it was just more or less in Barkley, it was just training. And in fact, Barkley was the first time I ever seen an armadillo. I'm from Washington State, so I've heard about them, but I've never seen one. And first one I seen, you didn't know whether you should shoot it or pet it. It's really an odd-looking thing. But we.
What about the training? I'd like to know a little bit about, of course, it's sort of at the end now, but what the engineers are doing, and also a little bit about some of the other people in the 119th that maybe squad leaders, platoon commanders, company commanders, just people you remember from the Camp Barkley days, the impressions that maybe they made on you. So take either one.
Yeah. Well, the company commander was Captain Cotter. He was a West Point graduate, and he was strictly a GI type person. And the first sergeant was a sergeant. I can't think of his name right now. However, he was in the First World War also, so he was getting right along age, and he went overseas with us. So he was in pretty good shape. We didn't do too much training at Camp Barkley because they were wrapping up everything, getting ready to get on the train to go to Camp Shanks in New York to ship overseas. The only one thing I remember about our training was one day they give us a whole carton of ammunition. They said, "Go up in the hills here back at Camp Barkley and just shoot it up, for target practice." I remember we fired so many rounds. The M1 has a wooden grip in front, and you fire a lot of rounds. It gets it started to boil. The stain started to boil out of the front grip because it got so hot. But that was strictly there. And the other thing I remember about Camp Barkley. Oh, there's another one. At Camp Barkley, we had a habit of marching down to the parade grounds every morning for our calisthenics. Well, I've always been tall, and the Army always puts the tallest people up in front of their formation. And I was always on the right front of the formation when we marched down the road. And we would go down to these calisthenics in our shorts, GI underwear. And whenever you approach a road, well, the order was road guards out. Well, the person on the right and left side would run ahead and stop the cars so the troops could go on down to the road. Well, here I'm standing there in my underwear, and here these young girls are coming to work at the PX and the laundry, and you stand out there. I think nowadays they tell you to go see my lawyer, because that's, it's kind of old floppy underwear in those days. But it's one thing I remember. Also, I remember about Camp Barkley was when we got ready to leave, they had a division passed in review, and like I say, now prior to Camp Barkley, I was just like an individual soldier. I didn't belong to anybody. And now here I was part of the 12th Armored, and they passed in review, and it was really a beautiful sight, because the troops were all well trained, and they marched good. The band was really, really a sharp band, and it was really quite a thrill to be part of the 12th at that time. But I don't remember too many other people from Camp Barkley. I remember the barracks.
Describe those, please.
Well, the barrack we had probably 5 people to a barracks, and they weren't very well made, to put it slightly. Naturally, Barkley has these sandstorms, and in the Army, you're required to keep things clean, your weapons and your uniforms, and the wind would blow through that darn thing like the door was wide open. But it was hot during this time when I said it was August. And another thing I remember, it's not important, but they had a what do you call it, a day room, and in this day room was a Coke machine, and they kept this Coke. It was just not quite froze. You could still drink it. It'd be like ice coming out. I remember that's really a treat to get in there and get that cold Coke, because I wasn't used to that kind of hot weather. But we got ready to leave Camp Barkley. Well, in those days, military information was kept pretty tight. So we did not know where we were going to go. We didn't know if we were going to go to the Pacific or go to the Atlantic. So we get on this train. We knew if we get down below Barkley someplace, you get on the main line, and if our train took a right, we were going to the Pacific. If it took a left, we were going to Europe. So we were all very happy it took a left. I didn't want anything to do with that Pacific Ocean. So.
But before we get to that trip, and we're very interested in what you have to remember about that, do you have any memories at all of your short time in Abilene and your contact with Abilene, the community, things you did on pass, people that you had interaction with?
Like I say, I wasn't there too long before we shipped out, but I remember going to Barkley and the bus rides, and we went up to some town north and got the usual photo with a cowboy hat on, and I just remember Barkley. I remember seeing a lot of I guess you call them from India, the people with the head wraps on it. But I don't remember too much more about, because I just didn't spend too much time there. It was probably only about 8 weeks or so. We were on our way. But
what about the train ride? What do you remember? One thing we're especially interested in is that day that you got on the train. How was that accomplished?
Well, in those days they had what they call Pullman cars. They had sleeping berths in the cars, and we just loaded up on it and found our place where it was all assigned to a certain berth, and that was it. I remember the train had a baggage car, and it had in this baggage car they had a large, what would you call it, a large cooking facility with briquettes. So they did their own cooking right in this baggage car for the whole train load. That way they didn't have to stop any place and get fuel.
What about travel across? What do you remember about that?
Well, about the only thing I remember going into, at that time, the Chattanooga Choo Choo Train song was real popular, and that's the time we went through Chattanooga. So that was remembered. But I don't remember too much about it. We just went up there and got to New York and Camp Shanks, New York. It was just a train ride, as always. There wasn't much going on. Just
This
See.
would have been in September 1944.
Right.
What happens when you get to Camp Shanks?
Well, Camp Shanks, of course, we were assigned to some barracks up there. It was a pre-embarkation, we call it camp. And one thing I remember very definite was we were to have one 12-hour pass in town. Well, it just happened to be this day. I've never seen it rain so hard in my life. I'm from Washington State. We know what rain is, but this was nothing like that. It was just throwing it down. Well, and we went down to to New York City, and I remember Times Square and all that stuff. And I was still, not now, I was 20 years old now. I just had my birthday. So I went in and started drinking a beer, you know, because we knew that would be our last pass in the States. So for the first and only time in my life I was thrown out of a tavern. It was to get too rowdy. But the main thing on that particular trip was which I just found out a few years ago, there was a tornado went through the town. You know, just throwing the rain down. You can't believe my shoes are full of water and everything. But we wouldn't give up because that's our last chance to have a good time. So we spent our 12 hours and back to Shanks. And it was time to load up to go to overseas. Well, they had a number on our hats, identified us, our hard hats, helmets. And when you get up to the gangplank, there's a Red Cross ladies there. And we had our rifles in one side, our duffel bags in the other, and our musette bag in the back, and ammunition belts, all that junk on us. So we had no free hands. So this girl would take our pockets and open it up and put a Hershey chocolate bar in it for a goodbye to say. Well, that was a good idea. However, as soon as we got on the ship, we had to, without stopping, went right down to our berths, which is way down below the decks. And it was hotter than a firecracker down there. So what happened? Pretty soon you feel something wet in you. The chocolate bar melted. So it wasn't a good idea after all. But we had to stay in our bunks until we got underway, probably the next day. And the trip was, of course, for some reason, a troop ship would be a heck of a good target for a submarine, but you think you'd worry about that, you know, about getting torpedoed or something, all these people on the ship. But I don't remember ever worrying about it. Just maybe it's stupidity, I don't know. But we went across the ocean, and the ship continually changed course. They said there's a lot of submarines in this area. They don't want to give you a chance to get zeroed in on us. And that's the way we spent our days. I took us around because
What kind of activities did you do?
there wasn't very much to do. We spent most of our time on ship because on the deck because it was so hot down below. And of course, every night the sign or the loudspeaker come out. Smoking lamp is now out. You know, so there's no smoking after dark. And I never smoked to start with, but I remember that. And it was primarily just laying around the deck. And well, this sergeant, I'll think of Sergeant Holt, was our first sergeant. And like I say, he hadn't been in the First World War. So he used to get us up in the bow and tell us about the First World War, which is 1918. But it was kind of interesting, give you a little forethought of what's going to happen in the next few months.
Did you have any contact with them after the war?
I didn't, but see, I didn't join the 12th Armored Association until about 1981 or something like that. I happened to be looking to a VFW magazine and seen the 12th Armored Association reunion. So, hey. So I wrote the chairman, and he sent me information about the people in my battalion, names, and I seen my buddy's name. We had a number. Generally, most guys had a number one buddy. Well, I seen my number one buddy's name in there. I wrote him. That's another. We're kind of bouncing around here a little bit, but so I wrote him, of course, right away, and he wrote me back. He said, "Oh, Gene, last time I seen you, we just had a really tough battle, and I had well, I tried to spend the night after this battle in a barn, and some people, they don't take combat as well as others, and maybe I don't know. So in this barn, these people were moaning and groaning. I guess you'd call it practically shell shock. I don't know. But this another thing, they'd be calling for their mother. You know, never their father, just their mother, which was really kind of upset me. So I went outside and decided to walk around a little bit. He said, well, last time I seen you, you was walking around out in the field, no helmet on, no rifle, and I had a rifle in my hand because his squad was coming down the road from something they had up there. So he said, it's kind of odd. Here it is, 45 years later, something like that. Here I am. I was cleaning my M1. He has a military collection. He said, I was cleaning my M1 just like it was last time I saw you. It was 45 years later.
What's his name?
John P. Parkinson.
When you were on board the ship, did you know him yet?
Oh yeah, we took basic training together. There's 4 of us that took basic training together, and went from basic training to camp to Mount Rainier Ordnance Depot in Tacoma, Washington, and down to Camp Beale, California, and to Camp Barkley, Texas. There's John P. Parkinson, Wayne B. Johnson, and Glenn C. McCune. For some reason, the middle initials are always something. You always use them. I guess that's to further identify them, but it's always stuck with me, their middle initial. But
Let's get back to the ship then.
Yeah.
When you arrived in England, where are you and what happens next?
Okay, we because of the submarines, we went way up north of Ireland, Scotland, and dropped down into England. The name will come to me in a minute, but I can't think right now. But I remember that particular landing. We'd been on the ship now for a couple of weeks, so we were ready to get off it because we're not sailors. And the English civilians had to build, the ship was extra high. It was the USS Mariposa. So we had to go ahead and they had to build a special gangplank to get us off the place. And it took them, must have been 5 or 6 hours when we really wanted to get out of it. So once we got off the ship, we boarded an English train, and they took us through Bath. It was quite a unique town that the Romans had there many, many years ago. And they took us several miles into an airfield where the paratroopers had stayed prior to their jumping into Cherbourg area. So at that field, it was of course rainy and muddy and cold, but they were tents to stay in. And one thing I remember about that particular field, I don't remember the name, but the particular field, they had they were still pulling gliders for over to France for troops and primarily for supplies, I believe. But they had a nylon cable about probably 2.5 inches in diameter, and, a long one, that would pull the gliders, like the DC-3s used to pull these gliders up in the air and away they go. I don't know what the idea was. I guess it was cheaper to haul them that way than individual flights. But we spent a few days there. Then we were transferred to Tidworth Army Barracks in Tidworth, England, where we drew all the equipment we needed. We stayed there. We had one pass in London. That's kind of interesting. I think we had a 24-hour pass in London, and there was still buzz bombing in London. So the people in town would go down and stay in the underground subway, and they'd rent the house out to us GIs, your apartments. And I remember we were there while we were there. You'd hear these buzz bombs coming over, and all once the motor would stop. And when the motor stopped, it's just like an airplane. It went to a complete drop right down. But like I say, we were young and careless. We didn't think much about it. But we spent the 24-hour pass there and just had a good time. Then I went back to the Tidworth Barracks, and this one night I was in the theater, and here comes this 2 young girls and their parents. One was about my age, so I started turning around talking to her, And one day, one time I turned around and talked to her. The seat was next to her. It was empty. I said, "Hey, is that for me?" She says, "Yeah." So, make a long story short, I got real friendly with them, and I'd go to their house, and I enjoyed it. It was good company for probably a month or so. The girl and I got lovey-dovey. She was just a nice gal. We enjoyed herself. So, the kicker is, about 2 o'clock in the morning, they tell us, load up and get out of here, So here we went right by her house, and I couldn't stop and say goodbye. I didn't have her address because I figured, have time. So sure she either thought I was a no-good GI or maybe I got killed in action. I don't know, but she never did hear from me. And of course, I don't know what happened to her. Well, while we were at Tedworth, we used to march out to the Stonehenge in Salisbury, England. I don't know how far that is because we could walk 15, 20 miles. It would be no big deal. So we would walk out to the Stonehenge and walk around that. And one day we were out in the parade ground, just probably learned to march or something. I don't know what we were doing, but here comes this airplane diving right down at us. Oh, geez. Well, what it was, he crashed right across the road from us. But what it was, that some plane was coming back from France, and apparently he was disabled. So he bailed out and let his plane go, and it just crashed. There's nobody in it, so that's kind of, you know. Finally, we get ready to leave the Tedworth, and I remember the tankers had their tanks at this time, and the roads in England are fairly narrow, and when they go to make a hard right or hard left, they didn't always make it. You can see these corners of these buildings just chewed right off because they hit the gulder and things and break them off. But we went down by convoy with regular Army trucks to Portland Bill. It's on the English Channel, and we loaded up. Went across we got on the LSTs. The LST is a flat bottom boat, and we got to the out in the English Channel. It's really choppy, and the flat top boat would come up, hit like that, and geez, it just darn near jar the fillings out of your teeth. But we went across the channel and got into the Seine River, the river that goes up to Paris, and we went 60 miles up the Seine River in the LST. This saved a lot of gas from all your trucks and stuff we had, and tanks. So went to a city called Rouen. That's the city that Joan of Arc was burned at. A little bit of history we learned that day. But then we got out and started up toward the lines, which is up around Nancy in that area. And the one thing I remember about that, it was cold. It was already, this was still just late fall, but it was still cold. So the blackouts was in effect. So I said, okay, my hands are cold. So I got a little can of gas, and I lit the sun gun to warm my hands, you know. And I seen some Jeep lights coming down the road. Before that, I'd started growing a little mustache, a little beard, you know. So I seen this Jeep lights coming. I went to blow the gas out, and what naturally, whoosh, the flames come up and burnt my mustache, my goatee off. But apparently the officer didn't see me because he didn't get on my back about it. But that took care of that deal.
Who's with you in terms of units? Is it just the engineer battalion?
Right.
Or were there other battalions with you?
Well, the whole division was moving up, so I was with my battalion, and we went to Forbach. Is where we went to Luneville, and that's where we're actually our company was formed by itself. And I remember some of our companies in half tracks and some were in trucks. And I remember this one half track next to me, they got out of the half track and they just started dropping like flies. Well, what happened, the exhaust pipe had been plugged some way and they were getting carbon monoxide in their car, in their half track. And but they soon were okay, but it was lucky.
What do you do? What's your job description in the battalion at this moment in time?
Being I had the training for, by the way, the Mount Rainier Ordnance Depots, we went to school for about 13 weeks learning how to repair equipment under fire just to get it rolling and out of the way. So being I had that training, they made me the assistant driver, which is a bummer because basically assistant driver is called into duty whenever there's a flat tire or the regular driver doesn't want to go wherever you want to go. But that was my basic job. Of course, that was a side job, you might say, because normally it was just, if we had overseas we had a bridge to build or a minefield to work on, that's what we did. But
do you have any training in minefield work?
Yeah, we had minefield training in basic training, booby traps, and how to booby trap them, how to disarm them, and that was at Camp Abbott, Oregon. It was in the cold of winter, which worked out very good because it was fairly cold over Europe too. So
well, you're at Looneyville. Take us from there.
Looneyville, well, actually, now Looneyville was getting pretty close to the front, probably 20 miles or something like that. And that's the first time we heard a war going on. And I say to this day, that's probably the most frightening time there was. Well, it's one of the most frightening times because there's such a barrage of artillery. You'd swear that it's every place you wouldn't have a chance to survive because every place, it just sounded like the sound was a solid curtain of bad news. So while we were at Looneyville, we had to check in all of our equipment, anything we don't carry, like our duffel bag with our personal gear, and was all stored in a warehouse there. And about a month or two later, we came back to this warehouse. We was able to go through and get something we wanted. But while I was back on the front, we'd have to go out and guard duty in the middle of the night. Generally we'd take over a house, and you get out, it'd be 2 hours on, 2 hours off, all that kind of stuff. So I took my bayonet and I cut a lot of grips in my notches in my front grip, so I could just run my hand over a rifle. Oh, that's mine. So we got back to this warehouse, and we had to check our rifles at the guard's shack. And I put mine there. He's seen all these notches on my rifle. He says, "Geez, that's for all the German." I just smiled at him, let him come to a conclusion. But he was a rear echelon guy. But after Looneyville, we went up to the line. I think one of our first jobs was to clear a minefield. Nothing exciting happened there, just we cleared it. But I do remember the first night we was under fire. We'd come into this area and they were told to dig in, dig a foxhole. But I thought it'd be real smart. It was on the side of a hill. So I just took my trench shovel, and I dug off the dirt here, and I pushed it down below, right? That way I didn't have to go down so far this way. And it worked real good until they started shelling us. Well, wet mud won't stop very much artillery. So needless to say, I never did that again. But it was a good idea to start with. But some people did get hit that night. But I just guess they were giving us a little welcome card because they probably knew we were green as grass there. But when we first went overseas, for some reason we were used more as infantry than we were engineers. Of course, we took infantry training at Camp Abbott, Oregon, and that's part of the combat engineer as an infantryman when he needed. But it seemed like we were needed more for infantry than we were engineers. Of course, we could be engineers today or this afternoon, and tonight we might be engineers because whenever they needed us, they'd grab us for whatever they needed. I don't know what else to say.
Talk a little bit about your first combat. When did it become apparent when you were starting to get into sort of a routine? And a lot of that might be engineering duties. Tell us about bridge building and that kind of thing. How did that work in concert with the other combat units on the line?
Well, the first time in combat was probably this minefield I was talking. No, the shelling, the first one. Then I don't know too much about chronological order, but I remember somewhere around Herlisheim we were holding the line there, and this we'd thrown up a treadway bridge across the canal. The canal was probably only about 25 foot wide, so it's under heavy fire, right in front of God and everybody. They could see us real good, So they had a tank come up. We had battalion had a tank set up, a Sherman tank set up, where a treadway bridge is two large steel treadways. And this tank could take the treadway bridge and lift it up in this manner in front of his tank under heavy fire and run up the canal, drop it down, and back off. You know. So that kept us from having to go out there in just our bare skins. So this happened, I believe it was at nighttime. And here comes dawn, and right next to this, where he dropped this treadway bridge, is a tree, a great large tree, which would not let a tank go across because of the overhang. So we had a demolition expert, so-called, in our battalion, or company, and he was told to go and blow that tree off. Well, right in front of, heavily exposed there. So for some reason, he come down with a terrific stomach ache, cramps. He had to go back to the medics right away. So that's probably one of the first times one of our people kind of turned chicken. But it didn't happen very often. I can probably only think of one other time, which is an officer. But some way or other, we got that bridge off. At the Hertesheim deal, we had to. Most people didn't know much about the American troops retreating, but believe me, we did a lot of retreating, and it's not easy to do. But we were told to retreat back into a better position. And I don't remember what happened to that bridge. I'm sure we didn't leave it there, but I don't remember what happened to it. However, I do remember we're going to be trying to get out of the area, and heavily exposed area. There's no trees to get behind them, or wooded areas or mountains. So I remember we took our gas mask and cut it up so nobody could use it. And we took the food out of our sacks, in like sea rations, opened them up and ground them in the dirt so nobody could use those. And generally the gas mask and excess food like that would be the first to go. We'd have rear guard action. In fact, this particular time I'm thinking about, there was two people kept for rear guard action, kept machine gunning for rear guard action. And the rear guard action would be the two people would man the machine gun until the other troops got back across the open field in case they started spraying the fire, where you could go ahead and shoot your machine gun at them. So the odd part about this was the youngest man in the outfit was myself. I was 19, and the oldest man was about 45. To me, that doesn't sound very old today, but he was the youngest man. So we covered the field until they got out, and we just picked up the gun and made a run for it, and we made it okay. But that's kind of a deal. But the other combats I remember, not too much use talking so much like this without thinking too much, but
Before we go on, let me ask you a question about Hertelsheim in terms of the overall experience. What were you guys aware of as things began to go wrong?
Well, the strange thing about, I guess it's not really strange, the odd thing about a soldier on the line, you don't know your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing. You don't know who's over here. You don't know what's going on, because if you're captured, they don't want to know. So I knew we were in trouble, but there was a lot of artillery, a lot of machine guns, a lot of burp guns going off. But you just don't know, because you're ignorant to the fact. In fact, I didn't even know about the breakthrough till up north. Till one night we were in we told this kind of funny. We put a minefield out because they figured that it was going to come over this knoll, and so we put a large minefield out in this farmer's field, the dairy field. Well, the middle of the night, apparently this when this breakthrough up north happened up Luxembourg. In the middle of the night, they said, "Let's go." Well, you can't say, "Wait, we got a minefield." When you're told to move, you move. So the next morning, I've always wondered if that farmer didn't let his cattle out there and have a lot of hamburger and milkshakes, because that field is covered with mines out there. But they never came over that knoll to us. But let's see,
Do you know where that was?
no, I really don't. I know we moved. One thing about an armored division, everybody has a place to ride in an armored division. So we could be here today and 60 miles away tomorrow. And in fact, when I left England, normally you take a little like an infantryman, normally it's going to do a lot of walking. Well, he'll have a little, maybe a GI blanket to wrap up in the winter. But I knew it was going to be cold in France, so most of us took, what would you call it, scrounged. We didn't steal, we scrounged about 4 or 5 army blankets. And instead of having a bedroll about 6 inches, we had about, well, 24 inches, because we knew we would never have to carry it, because we always had a truck to carry it for us. But in fact, that's another story on sleeping bags. We used to sleep in, had these little mummy bags. They finally come out and give us mummy bags. And it's a bag that zips all the way up, and just your head stops about here and it's exposed. Well, the rumor come down the line that the Germans had caught a bunch of guys sleeping in their bags, and they'd bayonet them before they get out of their bags. So from there on in, the rest of the winter, your bags stayed open. Cold as hell, but at least you wouldn't get caught in them. And one battle I know is, this is in the town of Bitch. Some people call it Bitche, but it's just like it spells the way it sounds. And we were told that we were being used as infantry again, and we were told there was only one 88 millimeter artillery piece by the church steeple. That's not too bad, So we start out across this field, and the bullets come by our head just like a bee is coming. It's just exactly like a bee or a fly. It's that close to us. And of course we kept on going. What we would do, we'd get under if it got really heavy, we'd get underneath the tank, Sherman tank, and the tank commander would know we're under there. And as soon as he got ready to pull ahead, well, they'd race their engine. That would be an indication that he's going to move ahead. We'd get out of the way. Well, this one time, he raced his engine, we got out of the way, and we had ropes also behind the tanks to help pull you through the mud and snow, save your energy. So this time he raced the engine and took off, and this one of my buddies, my squad members, kept hold of the rope. He was being dragged down the road, not the field. And we got him loose, and sergeant, he got hit in the leg, and apparently he froze some kind of a nerve, or he couldn't let go. So the sergeant went ahead and cut his clothes open to see what he could do about it. And at that time, the sergeant cut his finger pretty bad. So I always wonder if that character got a Purple Heart instead of a Lavender Heart. But the fella, he couldn't go on. I don't know how that worked, because we didn't have any medics with us, so they must kind of clean the field after we come through, if they have to pick up anybody. So we went a little bit further, and I'm over on the left side, and I see this a little branch is quivering. There's no wind blowing, but the branch is just quivering, like So I went over and looked. It was a foxhole, a German foxhole. So I told him, "Raus mit dem Foxschnell," that means get out right away. And there was 2 of them in there. And what they did, I think what happened, the tank would set his machine guns off and spray the area, and he probably cut these branches off and fell down in the foxhole. And these 2 Germans were so afraid he was going to drop a hand grenade or just shoot him. I noticed just quivering like a leaf down it. So I told him, out. So naturally, you want to frisk them before they send them back to the lines. No one's going to take them back. We're just going to point them and tell them to take off. But they wouldn't. I wanted to start frisking them. As soon as I started getting near them, they had their hands on top of their head. But as soon as I got near them, they started running. So I was hip shot it a couple times their feet to and I ordered halt, and they wouldn't do it. So I fired a few more. Well, I think at that time I was ticked off because I didn't want to shoot the guys in the back because their friends are watching us, and they'd never give up if we thought we was going to shoot them, right? So I let them go on. But to me, now it's kind of funny. You think they took off such a speed that maybe they thought I wanted to run a little faster, because they just started flying across that snow like 90 miles an hour. But I also know that the reason they was in such a hurry, they knew what was waiting for us. See, the city of Bitch is a fortress. It hasn't been taken in 1,700 years. I visited there after the war. It has maybe 3 stories underground with hospitals and livery stables and you name it. And they're like the walls are 17 foot thick, and they could look right down at us. That's what I don't know where these recon got the idea there's only 1 artillery piece. Cause they must not have went. They must have assumed there was. But after a while, we advanced further. Then they knocked out about 5 of our tanks. Bang, 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 just like that. The 88 would go through our tanks just like hot butter. And So I remember the tank right next to me got hit. It's only about 10 feet to my left. And once a shell gets inside the tank, it starts bouncing around. It sets off the ammo, and very seldom a person can get out of it because it's just ricocheting all over the place. But this one tanker got out, and I remember he had blood all over his face, and he says, "You guys got a weapon?" Because he didn't want to. He wanted to go back and get some of these guys that got his buddies, you know. But I don't remember what happened to him. But pretty soon we got the order to retreat, back off, if it sounds better. And one thing they teach in the Army is don't cluster up. You know, don't get too close together because you make a good target. Well, we got back in this little patch of woods, which, and we no sooner got in this area, and here comes a shell. You can tell it's coming right down on our heads. And of course, I dropped down to the ground real quick, but the shell hit probably 12 foot away from me, and the ground was froze. So maybe that saved me. I don't know, but it picked me up and set me over. Just the concussion of it. So I remember taking my hand, and feel my leg, and everything was still there. You know? So one guy had his leg blown off by the shell. It's only sent one to us, but that remind us of a lesson we learned: don't clutter up to yourself. You know? Keep away, keep separated. But one of our men was a flamethrower. It sounded like the infantry, not engineers. Flamethrowers, machine guns. That's what it. So this one fellow was a flamethrower for our platoon. And what we do at nighttime, we'd take over a house. You know, if the people were there, they could either get out or we don't care because if we got a chance to get out of the weather, we'd take it. So this fellow went up to the top floor, like a two-story house, and took off his flamethrower. They must have weighed over 100 pounds. And he started coming down these steps. I don't know if you ever was carrying a heavy load and took it off. You feel like you're floating. So he wound up falling down the floors and wrecked his leg. He was off for a long time because of the, it just makes you feel so light. He lost control. But what kind of bridge did we build? We built a bridge. Like I said, these areas. I think this was down by Colmar, but it could have been Hervesheim. I never did remember names because we'd be here today and gone tomorrow, so names didn't mean anything to it. The Army had rules that a lot of people didn't observe. You never keep a diary. You know, you don't say, well, today I'm in here, tomorrow, because if you're captured, well, they'll know who was in this area. And you certainly don't have cameras. Well, a lot of people kept diaries, and a lot of people kept photos, which is probably good for history now, but it wasn't possible. But I forgot what I was going to say there.
What kind of bridges you were building?
This particular town, we were going to build this Treadway Bridge again, and we started working at it. This time we didn't have the tank to carry for it. We had to build it by hand, and the Germans are on one side of the town, and we're on this side of the town. So the only way they can shell us is they have to shoot the projectile about straight up in the air, and then it comes right down. Well, when that happens, you can hear that shell coming a long time. It really makes a terrific sound. So as soon as I heard it coming, well, I had the engineers would, when you build bridges, if you're near the line, you put the rifle over sling over your back, so that way in case you need it real quick, you can whip it out on you. So I'm working there, and I hear the shell coming down, and I see that Treadway Bridge, which is steel. So, hey, that's the place to go. So I dive for in between these two steel girders. Well, there was an officer, wasn't quite as quick as I was. He was our platoon leader. And I got my rifle butt hit him right across, my sights hit him right across the head. He bleed like a stuck hog, but he didn't say nothing. Just shows I was a little bit quicker than he was. But we got the bridge built and everything was fine. But one other time I was talking about officers. We first got over in the Hervesheim area. Well, apparently our platoon leader, Lieutenant Bentley, was told to go up and survey an area to build a bridge across the Zorn River. So he, and for some reason, I don't know why, he took a T3 medic with him, Sergeant Stacy. and they went up to survey this building site. Well, this was one of our first days in combat, in the first week or two, and something I didn't learn until after the war was over. They were both killed. A mortar got both of them. So what happens? Well, they come back and they tell us, Lieutenant Bentley had a bad case of hemorrhoids, and he had to be taken back to England for an operation. That's the truth. So we, okay, so he had a problem. He had to go back to England, so we never seen him again. But I found out after the war he had been killed instead of being. So, like I say, the Army, they don't tell you nothing. So here comes this, or another officer in. He comes with a from headquarters with a Jeep and a trailer loaded with everything but the kitchen sink. And he calls us out. He says, "I want you fellas, you men, to know that I've been over here for quite a while, and I really know the Hun. Not the German, the Hun. So he's basically telling us how lucky we are to have him. Okay, fine. So, about the first night we go on an attack, we go out on an attack. He says, "This is snowy and frozen ground." He says, "Okay, dig in here." Well, the ground's frozen about a foot, and always have those little shovels, that you carry in your belt. So we hacked away, and we know we're being exposed to the Germans, but we finally get down below the freeze line. And he says, "Oh, wait a minute, we got to move over here." Okay, so we go over and we, the same old routine: dig, scratch, and get a hole made. And he said, "No, this isn't right either." So he went to our platoon sergeant, I'll think later, and said, "Look, I got to give me a squad of men, take me back to see Captain Cotter back at the CP, Sergeant Rebar." And so my squad took him back to the Captain Cotter, and he told Captain Cotter, he said, "Just Captain, I can't do it. It's too much strain on me. I just can't think out there." Well, they should have put him in jail because he was exposing a lot of guys to danger. So Captain Cotter sent him back to headquarters and never did see him again. But that's the first time I heard an officer turn chicken on us. So.
Do you know what his name was?
No, I don't. In fact,
You never saw him again?
no, but I was told, and I don't know if this is true or not. I was told he was one of the wine Gallo wine brothers. I don't know, but that's what I was told. But I have no truth on it. And what else we got here?
Before we go on, you mentioned, you described this Treadaway Bridge a little bit. What, for the purpose of people who wouldn't know, what's underneath those metal?
Nothing. It's made so it's, well, if it's a long bridge, you put pontoons under it. But if it's just like a canal, say from, say a 25-footer, it's strong enough to hold itself.
And it connects, do you anchor it on both shores?
Yeah, you can drive some pins on each end so it'll move around, but it's basically for real fast combat setup, because they have another bridge they call the Bailey Bridge. We built a lot of those. It's in fact, you still see them being used around the country today. It's I can't hardly describe it. It's a big, like a tinker toy. You put everything together, and it's the same way. That's what they use to build across the Rhine. Well, they use treadway bridges and Bailey bridges. The
Bailey bridges were used for wider stretches?
They're a little bit wider, but basically even the treadways are good enough for the tanks. They know about what the military width of their wheels are, and they could use either way. I believe the Bailey Bridge was a little bit wider because that way troops could walk at the same time but a treadway only, there's no place to walk if there's a tank coming or a truck. There's no place for people. But a Bailey Bridge could be have a passenger or a walking type sidewalk, if you will. But
what about bridges that were partially destroyed? Did you all do any restoration or just quick fix?
Yeah, well, the Bailey Bridge would be ideal for a lot of times they'll blow. You have your piers on each side, and they'd blow out the middle. Well, a Bailey Bridge is built so you can just push it across there and anchor it down.
What about bridges that have been mined? Were you all involved in going in and trying to get those things?
Well, I don't believe I was actually involved in deactivating the mine. I know I've been the unit rep now for about 10 years, so and I've been trying to have the people write me letters, first-hand reports. And one of the particular bridge you're talking about is the Dillingen Bridge. The Germans put 500-pound bombs on it, and in fact we have pictures. You may have it now of the people from my platoon removing these large bombs. And,
rolling them on the road?
Pardon?
Were you rolling them
Yeah,
on the road?
yeah.
I think we've got some actual signal corps footage.
Yeah.
There must have been someone there shooting that day. We got some silent.
Yeah, I know I have some still pictures of it. In fact, I recognize some of the guys. But what happened was, this is another story. What happened, I found my brother was overseas. And the only way I knew the division he was in, but of course you don't know his address because they just have an APO number. So I went to the chaplain there, the local chaplain, I asked him could he tell me what area my brother was in. So he told me, up around Sargi Mines. And so I went to Captain Cotter to ask for a 24-hour pass in a Jeep. Well, like I said, Captain Cotter had been a West Point man. So I'm in the office talking to the company clerk because he was out at the time. Just a few days before, we were up laying in the mud together and up in the battle area, but now we were back in relief, or rest area. So I'm talking to the company clerk, and in comes Captain Cotter and a battalion major. And I just looked at him and kept on talking. Pretty soon the major left, and here comes this voice, "Curry, come in here." I said, "Yes, sir." There's an old tradition in the Army calling attention when an officer walks in the room. Yeah, there's no, on the line, there's no saluting. There's the only thing you say, "Sir," but there's not a lot of military courtesy. So I kind of forgot about that crap. But so he read me the riot act, of course, and he's good at it. And then I had to ask for a 24-hour pass in a Jeep. Well, he gave me the pass, but not the Jeep. And in those days, this was in March of 1945. There's only military equipment on the road. There's no civilian cars in France, in the battle area. So I started hitchhiking. Now, Sargi Mines is a large town. I don't know how many thousands of people live there. But I hitchhiked, several different trucks going that way. And finally, I seen some guys out in the field playing horseshoes near a large building. So I said, "Hey, let me out here." So I walked right up to my brother, 6,000 miles from home. He was a medic. And I have this booklet I gave you a while back. I've got pictures of it. We took all the blanket. He was an ambulance driver, so we took all the blankets he had out of his ambulance to make a bed for me that night up in this 2 or 3 story building they'd taken over for a hospital. So on the way in there, I'd been over in France for 5 or 6 months, so I'd learned to speak a little French. So there's some French nurses there in the hospital. So I started talking to them. So they invited me to come down and play cards that night. So I told my brother, "Let's go down and play cards." So he went down. We'd made our bed up in the room, and they came down to play cards. Well, he was engaged to be married. He didn't want to be playing around. So after a while, he says, "I'm going back up the room. You know how to get there?" Yeah. I figured in 7th Heaven. So, of course, it's all blackout. Now, after I left the nurses, I decided to go up to his room. Well, I went up to this room, opened the door, and hollered, "Halt!" I tried to walk into his company commanders. They had a 24-hour guard there. Okay, he says, "Go down this way and around this way. That's where your brother's." Okay. I went down. I walked into another officer's place. They give me the halt again, So, well, I don't want to play this game. So I remember where his ambulance was. It's under guard, So I went down and when the guard wasn't looking, I jumped into his ambulance. Well, the only blanket left there was the day before some guy had his leg blown off. It was just covered with blood. But, it's cold. It was really cold. So I wrapped up in that blanket anyway. And the next morning, I find my brother. Well, now to jump ahead about 45 years, well, my brother had a stroke. And I visited him in the hospital in Utah. And I said, "Hey, Blake, you remember that last time I visited you in the hospital?" He said, "Yeah, that's the night you spent with a nurse." All these years, he didn't believe me. And I honestly didn't. That character, and he really believed I spent the night with the nurse. And I wish I had have used my moxie. I probably could have done all right there because, you know, my last night from off the front, and I may not make it, you know. However, I didn't. And I also saw some letters. Now, the medics keep fairly clean. They have a better system, but keep them clean. Now, our battalion, I think the whole division, we never had a shower or a change of clothes for about 5 months, you know. So in this letter he had written home to my folks, he'd say, I seen Gene today, but he doesn't look young anymore, and he's really dirty, you know, because such a contrast between Army medic clothes, you know. So, but I thought I had my cleanest dirty shirt on, that's for sure. But he was able to drive me back to my camp in his ambulance. I got a break there. I didn't have to hitchhike. But I was back here about 3 years ago. I went to Sargamines, and I couldn't even find this 3-story building that they'd taken over, much less how you find one person 6,000 miles from home. It's really something really weird. You could walk up to him like that. But in fact, what happened was this was March 15th, I believe it was, 1945. And I must have caught some sort of a problem in his ambulance. I don't know whether it was off that dirty blanket or what have you, but I come down with a terrific sore throat. So I left all my gear, just went over to see the medic, and I guess my fever was so high, he sent me back to battalion. The battalion sent me to division. Pretty soon I was back in the general hospital in Nancy, France, and they had a terrific fever and sore throat and that junk. And that's just after they needed a bunch of men up on the line. It's in March, just after that breakthrough. So they decided to take my tonsils out way too early. They were still ulcerated. And I remember, I thought I was a pretty tough guy, but I remember the tears coming down. It hurt so bad that they were taking them off in little pieces with a little, like a lasso. Boy, the tears are coming down me. And what happened, pretty soon they couldn't stop my bleeding. I'd fill up a whole wash basin with blood. And finally my arms start going dead. My legs start going dead. I couldn't see very well. I couldn't hear very well. And so I went down, they called me down to the office one day and they said, Curry, you've been ZI'd. What's that? You shipped back to the zone of the interior, they call it. Well, I was happy. I took my hard hat and flicked that thing. It's probably still spinning to this day because it's, I was happy to get out of there. But when I got back home, they decided I had contracted post-diphtheric polioneuritis, which means apparently so much germs got in my blood system, the whole deal, that I got polioneuritis. It means a multiple infection of your nerves. I couldn't step up on we got into Boston on a troop ship, hospital ship. I remember coming across a curb. I couldn't even step up on a curb. I had to have 2 guys help me up. But pretty soon, everything just got okay, and I was in good shape after that.
So you never went back?
No, that was the bad part about it. I can't say a bad part, but I never did go back. But all my equipment was left back at the company when I originally just went to see the company medic for a minute. You know, my brother had made me a real nice trench knife, and I had a mayor had given me a real nice oil painting of the Last Supper. He said the people that used to have it, if they're still around, that got shot. Apparently, they were German collaborators. So he gave me this beautiful oil painting, and all my personal gear. I never did see it again, but I got a free ride home, and that's kind of compensates for it. They shipped me to Spokane, Washington, which is Baxter General Hospital, and they finally diagnosed what my problem was there, and they discharged me from there, and I went back home, back to the railroad, and lived happily ever after.
Well, tell me about, I think you mentioned earlier off the tape before we began, you had 4 or 5 brothers.
Yeah, that's...
Tell me about that.
Well, my brother Jim, he was the oldest, we had 10 children in the family. My oldest brother was Jim, and he was drafted prior to Pearl Harbor Day, which is 1941, December 7th. And he went down to basic in California, and as soon as the Japs attacked at Pearl Harbor, they shipped him over to the Pacific, and he never got back home until the war was over, something like 4 or 5 years. And Then my brother Ed joined the Marines, and he wasn't in too long. He already had 2 children, and his wife had a set of twins, so he had enough points. The way you got out of the Army was if you have so many points for each child and so many points for this and so many points for that, when you get this certain number of points, so you could be discharged. So he had enough points. He got out of the Marines after 6 months or so. My brother Carl, he was he joined the Navy, and he was a deep sea diver. In fact, somebody sunk the large French passenger liner during the war. They called it Normandy in New York City, and that was his training was on this Normandy to seal the holes and get the ship back up to the top, which they did, but then they scrapped it after that. My brother Blake, he was in the medics, and he spent several years in the States. In fact, one day he and I was going over to a store there in Georgetown in Seattle, and I knew I was going to Camp Beale, a repo depot. He said, "Hey, Blake, I bet you $1 I beat you overseas." Well, I'll take that. So we made a deal, and as soon as I got to England, I got my dollar because I knew I was going to beat him, and I still have that dollar after, 50 years. But that's probably one reason I kind of wanted to get into the service, because I was the only one left out. Well, I had a younger brother, but in fact, I was working with this, and I got the call for the physical. And this fellow I worked for, he had a son that was 4F. And he says, "Gene, if they won't take my son this year, I'm not going to take you. I'll fix that." so I guess I was happy I passed the physical. I wasn't real happy to join the Army, that's for sure, but that's the thing you had to do. But the folks had a flag in the window. During the Second World War, if you had say one son in the Army, you'd have a flag in your window, a banner with one blue star with a red and white background. And if you had, of course, my mother had 5 stars in the window because there was 5 of us at the service at the same time. And what had happened if one of your sons or husband was killed, well, they'd replace the blue star with a gold star. I guess that's where the gold star mothers come from. But luckily ours all stayed blue. But,
what did the girls do during the war?
Pardon?
What did the girls do during the war?
They were all young. They were the youngest part of the family, so they just went to school. Of course, they would write us letters. Well, one other thing that would happen, when you're overseas, the only thing you could have shipped to you overseas is something you requested. Say you wrote a letter home, is "Please send me a pair of gloves." Or then the post office let folks send a pair of gloves. So what happened was these kids would go ahead and add little things, box of chocolates or what have you, and that's the only way you got things shipped overseas. The servicemen had to request it. One of those shipments, this sergeant, our squad sergeant, one time at Christmas time, he got this can about like a size of a condensed milk can, and we opened it up, and what happened? There was his mother had sent him a can of good whiskey. So he went ahead and opened it. We each one took a GI spoonful, and as the whole squad, he'd pour a GI spoon. But, that's one way we got some booze there. We used to come into towns, and when you first liberated a town, the people would come out and they'd hold the schnapps for you. Really, it was cold weather, and they'd take a drink of schnapps, and man, it would just warm you up real good. And then, of course, some of them give you wine too. But every once in a while, you go down some of these cellars. Someone had either thrown a hand grenade or fired a couple of shots. They had these big kegs of wine, and here you see the good wine dribbling out of the place.
So, since you were wounded and removed from the front, your 3 buddies that had gone through everything with you from training through combat, was that the end of your association with them until 1981, or
right.
Did you ever see them again?
No, never seen them. Until I happened to see that VFW meeting plan.
Well, do you have anything you would like to add, looking back over what you've had to say today? You feel like you need to add to the story, or comments about individuals or events?
Well, it's, I have a 300-page history that I've written about my experience, and the way I wrote that was I could sit in my little office, and I would, just like probably like a computer chip, I could turn that on and it would bring things back, and then I'd go ahead and type it out. But it's kind of hard talking this way. I know there's 1,000 things I could add to it, but I'm just not used to talking in this manner. But no, it's like I say, I was proud to be a part of the 12th. They were good people, and we had some rough times. One thing I know I did, and I think most other troops, no matter how bad it was in combat, let's say you had 12 people in your squad around you, and you look at them and you say, you guys may not make it for the day, but I'll be okay. You know, if you didn't have that attitude, I think you'd go crazy. And they probably had the same attitude, that you're going to be okay. And luckily it worked out that way. And I wasn't wounded. Like I said, I was real come down with this sore throat, I guess you want to call it. One thing they used to call it is a $1 million wound. Actually, this would be better than $1 million wound. A $1 million wound is a wound that will take you out of service, maybe a shot in the leg or an arm or something that will take you back in the hospital for, well, maybe send you all the way home. That'd be the $1 million wound. But
Well, this concludes the interview and the end of the tape.